Responsive design took the world by storm. It's basically everybody is doing responsive redesign. If you're not doing one, you're either planning to, or you will be planning one for sure. And well, if you don't know that yet, then you're probably kind of late to the train. Essentially, it became a new way of going to mobile because everyone realized that zero installation kind of path is perfect, and you need to maintain too many devices to code for each one of them. I mean, native apps. So mobile web with responsive is the best approach. Now, at TrueTV, we did the redesign last year. As you can see, a lot of our colorful imagery it was presented in a very responsive way, right? All the screens look somewhat different at with the same content. What I found is that everyone means their own thing behind the word responsiveness, right? They interpret it differently. One thing, the common across all of them is nobody says that responsiveness is bad. Responsiveness is the future. No one says no to responsiveness. Imagine you come up to somebody and say, hey, do you want the site to be responsive? And they say no. And that cannot happen, right? So it's kind of frustrating when they do development, but the great news is that some of them actually mean very responsive and fast, which plays in our favor, right? And literally, kind of, they talk about performance when they say responsive, right? Let's play their game as well. They change everything, like all the meanings for words, so why don't we do the same and sell performance as part of responsiveness? So I suggest you do that. It will simplify your performance efforts a lot if you write this train. Now, Ethan Marcotte, in his original article mentioned over there down below, wrote one characteristic about responsive design, which actually I got from Tim, a great quote. Responsive design is gradient of experiences, right? And what it means is that it's not just a couple breakpoints or whatever. It's whole variety of aspects for your website. Like screen sizes is the most obvious one. You can see that, and that's the most commonly talked to. But there are many others, and I kind of wanted to give a talk about that, but also about setting up responsiveness as a whole, right? And how it affects speed, obviously. So we'll start by talking about a few aspects of variability of this gradient, right? It's, again, size is the most obvious one. Then there is a kind of a art direction use case. I could shortly touch on that. Then we'll talk about formats and encodings for images, which it will make sense at that moment, and the bandwidth use case as well. So again, back to the most obvious one, size. Some screens are 320 pixels, and some screens are HD and triple HD. I believe that now there is like this quad HD. I think it will only grow. So the point is that the bigger the screen is, the bigger images you need. That's kind of obvious. I mean, I don't need to. It's not a technical, and most of my talk will not be really technical. It will be all those obvious things, but essentially, the bigger things need to be, the bigger they are in kilobytes. I mean, if you had some physics class, I mean, energy thing and all of that, you know, there's no way to get some more information without having more kilobytes of data for that, right? And from performance perspective, it's kind of obvious to all of us that the more kilobytes there are, the slower it is. Either on network, which needs to transfer the data in a web scenario, that's kind of one of the primary use cases, unlike the native applications, right? You need to transfer all the data from the server to the client. But also another use case is, and another important topic to pay attention to is memory and CPU on the, and memory in particular on the mobile devices, right? For desktops, it's not a big deal. Most of the CPUs and memory kind of, you have plenty in there, but for mobile devices, amount of kilobytes that image has basically it will, oh crap, it will affect how much memory your device will need to use to decode it. And it's actually not that straightforward, that's just one-to-one relationship. It's kind of how much encoding there is. The kilobytes are actually from bitmap size, and resizing huge images, it becomes even more nightmare. I will not go into a lot of detail about that, but Tim, our host, actually wrote a couple great articles about both of the topics about a year ago, so I would refer you to those articles where he talks about both on-the-wire use case and in-memory kind of in-device use case, right? So clearly, what you need to think about is when you need to serve different devices, images need to be as small as device so we can have as little bytes going over the wire. That's one rule that you just need to work with. Another aspect of responsive images that Apple gave us originally is pixel density, right? And many devices are coming out with higher pixel density. It became kind of a arms race between device manufacturers. And it actually is a relatively complicated thing when you talk about CSS and how to work and map your layout based on that. But when you talk about images, it's relatively simple. You just multiply the declared pixels by ratio, and that's how many pixels you need. Basically, you don't need to look at actual pixel ratio thing. You just need to look at what is the pixel resolution of that screen, and that's what your marketer teams will want to utilize, right? No marketer will say, let's use a smaller image so it looks worse, right? They will want the full power. And these are just a few examples of screen resolutions. I didn't put the original iPhone in there. It's being discontinued, I guess, or something. But the variety of pixel resolutions is huge, right? And unfortunately, Wikipedia deleted the article that contained quite a lot of these, and I had to find a new URL, and apparently Leo Viru created an awesome site called DPI Love, where you can actually get all of that information, including kind of pixels per inch, actual DPI metric for each phone, because it actually became harder to calculate, which is funny. But it helps with the marketing discussions if you need to kind of explain what's going on. Again, from performance perspective, just use the total resolution, and that's it. You know. Now, there is a special case in responsive images that everyone is talking about. It's called art direction. For those of you who are not familiar with it, basically proportional resizing of the image based on the viewport is relatively straightforward. You just go and like resize it, right? The problem is that on a small screen, that dog face becomes illegible, the bottom on the bottom, right? And if the dog is your primary content, you might want to go and crop it differently so it's much more visible on the screen, right? It's not really related to performance. I mean, in a way it is, because you want to minimize the image to fit the viewport as much as possible. But one challenge that you might find implementing art direction is that the workflow is not as straightforward. Script will not be able to discern dog's face from a couch, right? If it was a dog site, I mean, this is kind of obvious, but if it was a furniture site, that handle on the sofa would probably be more important to zoom in on. So that will require you to work with your CMS and implement some kind of a workflow for multiple assets representing the same kind of content, and involve editorial team to make those decisions and stuff like that. I mean, there are some ways to automate that. Like, for example, on social media, on social sites, faces kind of represent the main content. You can use face recognition techniques to zoom in and do some magic, but generally it is problematic, especially on user-generated content when your editorial team doesn't make decisions, but users will have to. So keep that in mind. Again, not necessarily performance-related, but during the conversation about responsive images, you will have this topic brought up, and you might need to be prepared to allocate enough resources for that. So we talked about size as it relates to pixel size of the image, right? Basically, more kilobytes per pixels, right? more pixels, more kilobytes. There is a way, as many of you probably know, to actually reduce the amount of kilobytes in the image. And JPEG has an embedded feature for that. You just pick the quality setting. It varies from 1 to 100. And yeah, the quality of the image will degrade, but overall content will be there. There is one challenge with that, unfortunately, is that for every image, that setting is different, right? You might be tempted to say, hey, I'll just go with 75% setting, or it's actually not percents, it's a number from 1 to 100, right? I will go with 75 setting, but for some images it will be great, and for some images it will reduce them way too much, right? Although 75 is a relatively safe bet, but essentially you will lose a lot of opportunity if you just set one setting. And having your editors use Photoshop manually will not really work because, well, they're really not into image optimization. They crop images, they find images, they don't really optimize images manually. So automating that was challenging for quite a while, but luckily a couple of years ago, the tool called JPEG Mini, and there are a few other tools that do similar things now, turned up. They started with the photographers, professional photographers, basically saving them disk space because those SLRs produce awesome, huge files, right? But it works equally well here. So essentially, they pick the setting automatically by visually comparing the images, the resulting image, and it turns out it works very well. Very well. At TrueTV, we implemented that, and we didn't have a single issue with images like that. And we have a mix of security camera videos and thumbnails from that, right? Very shitty images to start with. And we have marketing images that were well designed, right? So the range of I'm sorry, the range of decisions you would need to make and the setting you need to pick is pretty big. So. Using a tool like that in the automation pipeline is more or less required, I would say. And there, in addition to this, and this way of optimizing is called lossy, because you lose some quality, supposedly, right? But there is also a lossless, more traditional lossless compression where you can remove a lot of metadata. And if your editors use Photoshop, you will have a lot of metadata in the files. So removing them is removing that metadata about colors, about licensing, and all of that is quite useful. So have an automated tool that does this. We can call it recompression of your JPEG files. And again, JPEG is one example, but there are tools for PNGs and other formats that do the same. And for every format, it will be like that, right? There will be a better way to convert imagery data into the file format, right? So speaking of formats, we all know the three internet formats, JPEG, PNG, and GIF, right, Yov? It's GIF. Yeah. Those are kind of well supported across the board. But there are other formats being developed, and actually pretty solid formats by now. One is WebP, developed by Google, and JPEG XR, developed by Microsoft. The support for those is not even across the board, but within the browsers that support it, it's pretty well done. And those files are generally smaller than traditional JPEGs. And WebP is can be both lossy and lossless. Like it can replace both PNG and JPEG, theoretically. Even though each format is not necessarily supported widely, the combination of the two is a relatively high number. I forgot the latest numbers. I think it's something around 75% by now, if not more than that, covered by WebP and JPEG XR together. So you might want to look at that. Using those formats, again, probably an automated pipeline, right? Probably not manually created by your editors. So look at those for sure. One thing to note, you probably know already, I don't know if you do, but that GIF is actually not that good. PNG is always better than GIF, just almost universally, except for animation use cases, right, when you need animation. So you most likely need to reconvert your images from GIFs to PNGs. And same goes for PNGs to JPEGs when you have photographic imagery. Like JPEGs are much better for photography, while PNGs are much better for linear art and kind of vector, like rasterized vector graphics, things like that. So I actually see it quite a lot when we do Meet for Speed sessions at the meetup, where we help people optimize the site. They will have like carousel with 5 big images, and 4 of them will be JPEG, and like kind of in okay state, like still need some JPEG mini on them, but PNG will be like 5 times bigger in file size because it is actually a photographic image saved as PNG. So having that automated conversion from format to format is quite useful, and again, every byte matters. I believe this latest stats from HTTP archive is that it's 60% of the web page size is actually images, right? So you want to slim it down as much as you can. There is another use case, is SVG format actually. It's a vector graphics, right? The support is again not full. I actually don't have any statistics on how well SVG support, and there is a gradient of support across the board. You can use the caniuse.com website to identify where you can use that. But some of the linear graphics, clearly you can use SVG for that, and vector formats are always tiny, especially after you gzip them and stuff. So there is a great article, by the way, on the last year's Perf Planet calendar about image formats from Akamai team, and covering this in quite a lot of detail. So I suggest you read that as well. So it's calendar.perfplanet.com. Great resource, by the way, every year. Another little bit esoteric topic is bandwidth and varying bandwidth, right? Like we have, again, as ROM tools tell you, we have users who have good bandwidth, and we have users who have bad bandwidth, or I should say that nothing is bad, it's just low bandwidth, right? You can think that maybe we can have different versions of the images based on the bandwidth. If they have good bandwidth, give them big image, they will enjoy it. If they don't let them wait forever. The trouble is that unlike video, where it's a very well-developed field with variable bitrate and things like that, in the images it's actually quite problematic to achieve. Some vendors do that, but it's relatively hard to do. And most importantly, identifying the bandwidth is actually hard on the small assets, right? On video, if you have an hour of the video, you have enough statistics throughout the case to identify the actual bandwidth of the user. With images, it's relatively hard. So I don't really have a good advice on using bandwidth detection for images, but I would love to hear some use cases if anyone has a good story about that. One now controversial topic is progressive JPEGs, which basically kind of allow you for progressively enhance the image as it downloads. Right? You would think that's a perfect solution for bandwidth, right? Bandwidth problem. Like you get lousy image and then better. Well, you should have attended a session by Tammy Evers and Kent Alstad from Redware yesterday. They actually released psychological research. Now everyone is treating it as a very controversial topic. Everyone thinks that shouldn't be happening, but essentially research showed that actual experience is not better when you see first lousy version of the image, right? So again, guys did a great research, and I hope we will help them do even more and more research into that. But apparently, showing something quickly is not necessarily the answer anymore. You need to make sure that what people see is actually making them happy, right? But Patrick still has this metric for progressive JPEGs in web page tests, so if you use that, it will still tell you to use them.
He said he may remove that.
Oh,
as a result of that.
yeah. So Patrick, Yoav is saying is that Patrick might remove that as a result of the talk as well. So nothing is set in stone. Tools and ideas are changing. So one other part that kind of people forget in responsive images is that And I think most of my talk is like that. We kind of look into the devices and the resolutions and things like that, but we forget that actually it needs to be implemented in the workflow. And I also mentioned the editing process for editorial team, especially if you have art direction use case, but you kind of need to establish this pipeline for processing all the image assets. Again, starting with editing, but then optimization needs to happen, and you don't want to do it like live in line with your main processing. You probably want to have some queuing system to asynchronously process images, because it takes a little bit of time, especially if you count deployment of all of those images to your CDN, which I hope you all use CDNs for image deployment, because that's definitely a practice to speed up things. It's kind of not related to responsive images, it's just all images need to be located closer to the user. So basically, pay attention to this kind of build of your processing pipeline. It might take more than you expected when you originally researched the issue, right? We kind of developed it relatively quickly, and we bought the JPEG Mini. I don't expect you to read that diagram very easily. It just tells you that there is kind of a lot of stuff going on when images get deployed. So when you architect your system, allocate a significant amount of time for that. If you're brave, you can use the inline services that you just specify a URL, and it will optimize the image according to the rules. But frankly, I would be careful relying on somebody else's service, and since all of these things take time anyway, the actual processing takes time, I would use caching, and the moment you implement all of that, you kind of can do that on the deployment stage instead, right? So I'm a little skeptical about live image processing, but it was a good start. If you just want to try it out, it's a good start to kind of have a quick result out of that, right? And again, there is an open source project, and there are a couple of services that let you do that. Now, to the core of responsive images. Basically, once you have all of those images created, you need to put them on the page, right? And I would like to thank Yoav personally, and he's sitting right here, and Responsive Images community group altogether for a great T-shirt that they sent me after Indiegogo campaign. But essentially, what all of the effort that they put into implementing this picture solution, and basically all of these versions of responsive images markup. And I purposefully put very little on this page because there is a whole talk that Yoav gave yesterday, and you should definitely check out for all the different use cases, which tag to use in which use case, and some history as well. It's well worth like very long and detailed research on your end to understand how that works. So now it's part of HTML spec, which is awesome. And it's coming out in latest Chrome in upcoming Chrome and Opera, and a little later in Firefox. And please, if you see an IE engineer, please ask them to look at the ticket system they have for tracking this, because they're already looking at it. It's under consideration, so help them decide, please. Again, Scott Gell updated his picture fill Polyfill for the browsers, so you can start using all of this syntax today with a little bit different syntax to make sure all the browsers don't break, and a few other things implemented there. And please don't read this, go to actually the page that describes all the syntax and stuff like that. It's just an example. Don't look at that. But essentially, my advice for this, still to this day, you probably don't want to write that by your hand, right? You probably want all of that processing system that has accounts for all of the versions of the images that you have to actually write it out. So in our PHP world at TrueTV, we use this awesome image PHP tag. You just define the path, and just it writes out whatever the syntax on the page that you need. And again, for ever-changing syntax, which I hope by now is solid, although there are some new changes, some new improvements that might come with other use cases, right? But so syntax is hopefully solid by now. This is amazing.
There won't be any backward,
yeah,
non-backward compatible changes.
Yeah, so since it's in the standard, I mean, there will not be backwards compatible changes, incompatible changes. So that's great. But for the management perspective, your system will need to know what to output, right? So kind of don't give this machine gun into developers' hands so they don't shoot everybody around. Give them a little pistol, a tiny one, so they can just implement that. Jason Grigsby wrote about like 8 guidelines and 1 rule. It will always change. So it might not be changing that much, but still keep an eye on that. So when we implemented it at TrueTV, I had a kind of a dual feeling about it because the amount of work that went into this was quite significant, and maintenance and keeping up with the standards. Maybe by now it will be a little easier to implement now that we have standards on the front end, but generally the whole pipeline of implementing that is relatively tedious work, and a lot of you need to pay a lot of attention to it. So you might want to consider automation solutions, right? Things that would just implement, send the proper image to each client, right? And it can be an open source tool like Mod PageSpeed for Apache, and they have a version for Nginx that has a lot of these different filters for image optimization, right? Or you can buy it from FEO providers like Akamai, Redware, and others. Images actually is a pretty good use case for FEO. They're relatively straightforward, basically match the device, send them the right image, and things like that. I don't think Josh Morantz had the talk here. He's not at the conference, but in the California talk, if you can download the video from the summer, he gave a very detailed talk about automating image responsiveness. I'm glad I'm not talking at that conference because everybody else talked about responsive images. Here it's only Yoav and me. So think about automation. Consider that it's quite important. You might want to choose to buy that and just offload it from your shoulders. It's a lot of things to take care of. So that's kind of a lot of, all I had about what you need to do to make the responsive images fast. And we don't have to say that responsive is slow. No, you can make it fast. Just you need to actually work on that. So these are the numbers that we had on our homepage after the test. So again, I apologize. We actually didn't have the full gradient of experience. We kind of measured three breakpoints on our side. And it will probably happen to your redesign as well. You will start with like 3, and then slowly but surely your whole team will think about the whole gradient. But these are 3 breakpoints, and for the large breakpoint, we had 1.5 meg of images on the page. For medium is 1.2 megs, and for phone it was 0.4 megabytes, right? 400K for the smallest resolution. So it's a huge win if you think about it, right? I purposely don't put timings in because, again, according to Ram, we have many users, and some of them slow, some of them fast. So don't think in timings, but definitely implement that. Another graph that actually shows the original images that were uploaded, which makes it much more promising as well. If you do not optimize your images, period, then your users will upload 4 megs, and that's basically what we had at that moment, right? I mean, you might have less or more images, but the ratio of 10 to 1, unfortunately, is real. And you have the SOZE project, right, that analyzes the websites to kind of to measure this ratio, has the same statistics. So it's not only our research. So it's pretty amazing how much difference this pipeline makes. I hope you will take a look at this and will think about implementing something like that, either yourself or integrating with automated solution. Again, at TrueTV, we did a first step towards the solution, and we'll keep upgrading it, and so it's never an ending game, and don't consider it lightly when you think of build or buy. So that's kind of all I have. I'll be happy to open to questions. And if I will also have office hours after this, so I'll be happy to go into detail about each of them. Thank you.
All right, so yeah, we've got like 10, 14 minutes for questions, so
quite a lot of
fire
minutes.
away. I'll run around with the mic so that people can hear.
Was art direction part of your automated pipeline? And if so, how and where did you insert that?
It was definitely considered, and we considered against it because we didn't have time to implement it, essentially. Everyone has a deadline to hit, right? And it's always a problem. So it's a tough one because unlike the regular use case, it's not just the infrastructure layer, right? It touches all of the design process. It touches everything. So especially if you have user-generated content, I actually didn't see any good implementations for doing that. That did it perfectly, right? So if you ever had this background image on Google+, it's either huge or tiny, right? If you want to put an image there, you don't know what to put there. So that's a good example. So.
Just a short question. No would be good, and no answer would be good as well. But do you know of any two utilities that enable you to strip metadata from images but keep like the copyrights or keep some of the fields there for legal reasons or other reasons?
I think it's changed over the
orientation?
years, so I kind of looked at it for quite a while. But I thought JPEG Tran had some options to actually do that differently. So I'm not positive here, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for us it didn't really matter. First of all, because we own all of our imagery. And if it's important to you, pay attention to this topic of like licensing information within images and stuff. But I believe there are also always other ways to provide licensing information. So from legal perspective, there is no obligation to have that in the images. It's like there are ways around that. So.
Okay.
Oh, here we go.
What was the name of that study that you're referencing? SOZA or?
Cesar Soze, it's a tool Yov wrote. Yeah, he's probably the best person to answer about it. So yeah.
It's a utility that basically downloads a website, analyzes the display image, the display of the various images, and then downloads them again and downloads the images and resizes them to their display size and measures the difference. And I wrote the utility. The community group built a front end, so it's now an online service, which caesarsoze.org, but it's not a really. There's one server. It's flaky, but yeah. It works. And Tim did a blog post about it, ran it on a bunch of sites, and just measured the difference.
Yeah.
And there is a huge difference.
Results are dramatic. I really mean it. It's kind of eye-opening, and if you didn't plan to do image work, you definitely should check it out and go back to business, because forget about performance. I mean, you pay for that bandwidth, right? There is a person in your company that writes a check for the bandwidth. And this reduces, 10 times for images is not 10 times for bandwidth, right? But it is pretty high correlation between the two. And unfortunately, I don't have any numbers handy, but I believe there were some companies that saw that difference in their basically operations and checks, bottlenecking on network. I mean, there are many implications. Tim?
Yeah, definitely a tool worth checking out. And depressing sometimes.
But gratifying when you're done, so.
Hi, can you go into the current state of the art of the polyfills that we're going to need for the
yeah, it's very simple.
Like?
That Polyfill was Polyfill was updated just recently. You should use that.
Oh, is it, I mean,
yes, yes, we are using it. It's safe. We actually used the first version. And it's safe to use. It's solid enough. There are some use cases where the size of the polyfill will play with you, but well, frankly, when you are at that stage, you probably know every polyfill in and out by then. When amount of JavaScript is just too much for you, but your images will probably be bigger anyway. So I believe you should definitely use that. I believe Yov actually suggested that if you attended his talk. Okay, implications. What are the implications for Google image search and basically discovery? The syntax, I don't know if you see it here, actually has the IMG tag as a fallback mechanism. The previous solution that used pictured div or whatever we called it, basically that used span tags and all of that, that solution wasn't as friendly, but this is better. And basically the one that got standardized or in the standard process, right? That one is much more friendly in that sense. Yeah, I don't know enough results yet, and obviously Google will never tell you the results, but I believe that's
kind of like the canonical for the image.
basically yes. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah. I'll run next time, sorry.
Hey, did you guys ever explore the embedding of images in fonts because of performance reasons, like rendering mostly?
Oh, you mean for icons or for photographic
exactly,
images?
static stuff that you use in your interface.
Well, in our case, we actually don't have that many iconography on the site to worry about it. In our case, photographic images matter the most. But I believe it's a controversial topic. I mean, generally, if you ask me today, and I might not be the best expert on it, but basically don't use fonts. Yeah. In Meet for Speed sessions that I do, again, we just sit down and just look at the website and optimize them. Fonts are just the trouble. I hope next people in the industry who are closer to that topic will address that the next, because after images, fonts are just trouble. That's why Patrick, if you use web page test, and if you don't, you should, he used red color for fonts, because that's the trouble. And it's probably worth 5 other talks.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, Sergey.
Thank you.